Corpseman Aldrich Voss was not a man who asked for much anymore. He had asked for plenty in his younger years, asked for more ammunition, asked for air support that never came, asked for enough time to save people who were already gone before he reached them. He had spent 22 years asking for things in the middle of chaos, in the smoke and noise of a war that most people in Ashford's Rest had already half forgotten. He had given everything he had to give, and then a little more on top of that, and when it was finally over he had taken his discharge papers, his medic bag and his 6 dog tags, one for each member of his unit who had not come home, and he had come as far from all of it as a man could reasonably get. Ashford's Rest was about as far as it got. It was a small colony on the edge of mapped space. Quiet. Cold in the winters. The kind of place where the most exciting thing that happened on a given Tuesday was that old farmer Gordon Hale got his boot stuck in the irrigation ditch again and needed help pulling it out. The kind of place where people knew your name and left you alone with it at the same time. Aldrich had arrived 7 years ago with nothing but his bag and his dog and a very strong desire to hear nothing louder than wind for the rest of his life. He had built his clinic in the first year because people needed one and he was the most qualified person within 400 kilometers. He had not planned to. It had simply happened the way most things in his life had happened. Someone needed help and he was standing there so he helped. The clinic was small. 3 examination rooms, a supply cabinet, a front desk with a chair that squeaked when he sat in it. He had never gotten around to fixing the chair. At this point it felt like a friend. He was locking the front door of that clinic when the new year was still 3 hours away. The colony of Ashford's Rest was making noise outside. Real noise, the warm kind, the kind that came from people who were happy rather than people who were afraid. Lanterns had been strung between the buildings along the main square. Someone had set up a fire drum near the old stone fountain, and a group of farmers and retired workers were standing around it with cups in their hands, laughing about something that Aldrich could not hear from this distance but could guess was probably about Gordon Hale. Children were running in the snow, leaving chaotic trails of boot prints across the white square. Somewhere further up the road music was playing, something with strings, soft and warm against the cold night air. Aldrich stood on the clinic steps and watched all of it for a moment. He was not a sentimental man. He would have said so himself firmly if anyone had asked. But there was something about this particular moment, the lanterns swaying, the children's voices carrying through the cold, the fire drum glowing orange against the white snow, that sat in his chest in a way that was not entirely unpleasant. He had built a life here. A quiet one. A small one, maybe, compared to what he had once been part of. But it was his, and it was peaceful, and on a night like this he could look at it and feel something close to satisfied. His old dog Biscuit was waiting at the bottom of the steps. Biscuit was 11 years old, which was getting on for a dog his size. His muzzle had gone fully gray 2 winters ago and he moved carefully now, the way old things move when they have learned to respect their own limits. He had been with Aldrich since he was a puppy, since the year after Aldrich had arrived in Ashford's Rest, and the two of them had developed the comfortable, wordless understanding of creatures who had lived alongside each other long enough to stop needing to explain anything. Biscuit looked up at him with one eye half open. "Don't give me that look," Aldrich said. "We're going home. Actual food. Fire in the stove. Nobody bleeding." Biscuit's tail moved once, slowly. Aldrich reached down and briefly scratched the dog's ears, then straightened and pulled his coat tighter. The temperature had dropped sharply after sundown and his knees had been reminding him of this fact for the past 2 hours. He slung his medic bag over his shoulder, 38 years of habit, the bag went where he went, end of discussion, and started down the clinic steps. He had made it exactly 4 steps across the square toward home when he stopped. He stopped because Biscuit stopped first. The dog was standing completely still, head up, ears forward, staring at the sky above the eastern edge of the colony. Biscuit was not a nervous animal. In 11 years Aldrich had never seen him spook at weather or noise or the occasional wildlife that wandered too close to the colony fence. But right now every hair along the dog's back was standing up, and he was making a very low sound deep in his throat that Aldrich had never heard from him before. Aldrich followed his gaze. The sky above Ashford's Rest was clear and black and full of stars. It was always full of stars out here, one of the few genuine luxuries of living at the edge of nowhere. But something was wrong with the stars on the eastern side. A section of them had gone dark. Not clouded over. Not dimmed. Simply gone, as if something very large was moving in front of them. Something very large and getting larger. Aldrich stood very still and watched the dark shape descend. His first thought was a transport vessel, but he dismissed it almost immediately. Transports did not move like that, they came in smooth and controlled, following standard approach vectors. Whatever this was moved with a kind of heavy, lurching rhythm that he could not immediately place. An irregular beat. Something that was working very hard just to keep itself in the air. Then the shape crossed in front of the pale winter moon and he saw the wings. They were enormous. Each downward beat sent a shockwave of displaced air rolling across the square, and Aldrich felt it in his chest before he heard it. A deep, rhythmic pressure like standing too close to something with a very large engine. The lanterns swayed violently. Snow lifted from the rooftops in long white streams. The music from up the road stopped abruptly. Children stopped running. Conversations died. The whole colony went quiet all at once, the way places go quiet when something changes in the air and every living thing in the area receives the same silent message at the same moment. Aldrich watched the shape drop lower. It was descending too fast. Not the controlled, deliberate descent of something that knew what it was doing, but the falling drop of something that had simply run out of sky to buy itself more time. One wing was held slightly lower than the other, trembling with a fatigue that was visible even from this distance. Whatever it was, it had been flying for a very long time and it had nothing left. It came down in the square. The impact cracked the paving stones. Snow exploded outward in a ring. The fire drum tipped sideways and scattered orange coals across the white ground. People screamed and ran, in every direction, away from the square, away from the thing that had just fallen out of the sky into the middle of their new year. In the sudden chaos and the swirling snow and the noise of scrambling boots and frightened voices, Aldrich Voss stood still and looked at what had landed. It was a dragon. Dark green scales, deep as old forest, with veins of copper running through them like cracks in ancient stone. A body the size of a cargo hauler. A long neck lowered now trembling. Amber eyes that caught the light of the scattered fire coals and burned like lanterns in the dark. And pressed against her chest, cradled in both enormous forelimbs with a care that was almost painful to look at, something small. Something that barely moved. A hatchling no bigger than a large dog with scales so pale and dull they looked like ash. The dragon mother looked at the clinic sign above Aldrich's door. Then she looked at him. Her amber eyes were not angry. They were not threatening. They held the single expression that Aldrich Voss, in 38 years of medicine, had learned to recognize faster than any other. The expression of someone who had tried everything else, run out of time, and arrived at the last door they had left to knock on. Aldrich's hand found his medic bag strap. He was already moving. The dragon did not move after she landed. That was the first thing Aldrich noticed as he walked toward her. Most large animals, when they came down in an unfamiliar place surrounded by noise and panicking creatures, would shift, would turn, would show teeth or spread wings or do something to establish that they were the most dangerous thing in the immediate area. It was instinct. Even domesticated animals did it when they were startled. This dragon did none of that. She simply crouched over the small pale shape in her arms and breathed, each exhale coming out as a long shaking cloud of steam in the cold air. Her wings were folded close against her body now, trembling slightly at the edges. Her great head was lowered, angled downward toward the hatchling, and she was making a sound so low that Aldrich felt it more in his feet than heard it with his ears. Not a growl. Not a warning. Something else entirely. Something that, if it had come from something smaller, he might have called a whimper. Behind him, the square was emptying fast. Boots on stone, people calling out names, children being swept up and carried away. The New Year lanterns were still swaying from the impact. Several had gone out. The fire drum was on its side, coals dying in the snow. In the space of about 40 seconds, the warm and busy square of Ashford's Rest had become cold and empty and very, very quiet. Almost empty. Sir. The voice came from his left. Young Prentice Webb, the colony's security officer, 22 years old, broad-shouldered and completely white in the face, had not run. Aldrich gave him credit for that. The young man had planted his boots and raised his rifle and was pointing it at the dragon with both hands, and the rifle was shaking, but it was pointed, and that counted for something. "Sir, please step back," Prentice said. His voice was doing its best. "Lower the weapon, Prentice," Aldrich said without stopping. "Sir, that is a class 4. I can see what it is. Lower the weapon." "Aldrich." "She's not looking at you," Aldrich said simply. "She hasn't looked at you once since she landed. Lower the weapon and step back." Pause. Prentice looked at the dragon. The dragon had not, in fact, looked at him once. Her amber eyes were fixed entirely on the small pale shape against her chest, and on the old man walking toward her across the cracked paving stones. Prentice lowered his rifle by about 3 inches. It was not all the way down, but it was something. Aldrich kept walking. He had learned, a long time ago, the particular discipline of walking toward things that every reasonable instinct told you to walk away from. It was not bravery exactly. Bravery implied that you had fully considered the danger and chosen to face it anyway. What Aldrich did was something more automatic than that, a deep, trained response that had been built into him over years of running toward explosions and burning vehicles and collapsed structures because there might be someone alive inside. His body simply went. His brain caught up later. Right now his brain was noting, in a calm and professional way, that the hatchling's breathing was visible even from this distance, and it was not right. Too shallow. Too fast, then too slow, with uneven gaps between that had no business being there. The color of the little one's scales, what he could see of them, was wrong. Dull and pale, like metal that had lost its shine. He stopped 6 meters away. Up close, the dragon was even larger than she had looked from across the square. Her head alone was the size of a small vehicle. The copper veins running through her dark green scales caught what little light remained from the dying lanterns, and her amber eyes, when they fixed on him, were bright and sharp despite the exhaustion written into every other part of her body. Those eyes were intelligent. Deeply, uncomfortably intelligent. Aldrich had met many species in his years of service. He had treated soldiers from 7 different worlds in field conditions with no preparation and no translator. He had learned, out of simple necessity, to read faces that did not look anything like human faces, to find the fear or the pain or the trust or the hostility in eyes and expressions that no human instinct was built to interpret. What he saw in Veritha's eyes right now was something he recognized without any difficulty at all. She was at the end of her rope. Not dangerous. Not aggressive. Just finished. Run all the way down to the last thin wire of herself, holding on to nothing but the single purpose of finding help for the small creature in her arms before it was too late. He had seen that look on parents in field hospitals. On soldiers carrying wounded friends. On people who had been strong for as long as strength was possible and had arrived somewhere with nothing left but the need. He held up his medic bag. Slowly. Deliberately. Both hands visible. "My name is Aldrich Voss," he said, keeping his voice low and level. "I am a medic. I have been a medic for 38 years. He paused, letting the translator on his collar work. "I would like to look at your child. I'm not going to hurt him. I need you to let me come close." The translator finished. Silence. Verith stared at him. He waited. He was good at waiting. Patience was another thing the war had built into him, layer by layer, the patience of a man who had learned that pushing too hard at the wrong moment cost lives, and that sometimes the most important thing you could do was simply stand still and let something decide whether or not to trust you. The dragon breathed. Steam rolled from her nostrils in long slow waves. Then she did something he had not expected. She spoke. The translator caught fragments. It was not calibrated for her dialect, working from base language roots, doing the best it could. But the meaning came through clearly enough. She had taken Sorn to 3 dragon healers. The first 2 had given her a purge compound for the reef toxin he had swallowed during their migration. The third had examined him for a long time, said nothing, and then told her quietly that she should prepare herself. She had left before the healer finished the sentence. She had taken him to an alien medical facility 2 territories over. They had looked at her through a glass partition, consulted among themselves, and told her they were not equipped for draconic patients. The liability was too high. She should contact a specialist. She had asked for a referral. They had given her a pamphlet. She had taken him to a second clinic after that, smaller, on a border station. The doctor there had come outside, taken one look at her, and gone back in without a word. She had been flying for 4 days. Her navigation system had developed a fault sometime in the 3rd day. Exhaustion and inattention, she said, in a tone that carried no self-pity, only fact. She had been aiming for a larger settlement further along the trade route. She had seen lights through the cloud cover and come down because Sorn's breathing had become worse in the last 2 hours and she had no more time to spend in the air looking for somewhere better. She had not chosen Ashford's Rest. She had simply run out of sky. Aldrich listened to all of it without interrupting. When the translator finished relaying the last part, he nodded once. "You came to the right place," he said. He did not say it to make her feel better. He said it because he intended to make it true. He walked forward the remaining 6 meters and knelt down in the snow beside Sorn. Up close, the hatchling was very small and very still. His eyes were closed. His sides rose and fell in the wrong rhythm, that uneven, searching pattern that Aldrich had learned to identify in the field as a body working too hard just to do the thing it was supposed to do automatically. One small clawed hand was curled loosely against the stone. Aldrich set his medic bag down and opened it. Behind him, he heard Prentice Webb let out a long, slow breath. He heard boots on stone, not running away, just shifting, and when he glanced back, the young security officer had lowered his rifle the rest of the way and was standing at a careful distance with his hands at his sides, watching. A few others had drifted back to the edges of the square. Quietly. Carefully. The way people come back when the immediate danger seems to have shifted into something else. Something they do not yet have a word for but feel they should stay and witness. Vareth held very still above him, her great body curved around the space where Aldrich knelt, close enough that her warmth reached him through his coat. She was watching every movement of his hands with an attention so focused it was almost physical. He looked up at her once. "Talk to me," he said. "Tell me everything. When did this start?" And she did. Vareth talked and Aldrich listened. He listened the way he had always listened in the field, not just to the words but to everything underneath them. The pace of them. The pauses. The places where her voice dropped or tightened without her meaning it to. A patient could not always tell you what was wrong. But if you paid attention, really paid attention, the story was usually in there somewhere, waiting to be found. She told him about the reef. They had been 3 days into their migration south when Sorn had spotted something bright beneath the surface of a coastal shelf and gone down for it before she could stop him. He was 8 months old and curious about everything and fast in the water in a way that still sometimes surprised her. By the time she reached him he had already eaten whatever it was, something small and colorful growing on the reef rock, the kind of thing that looked harmless and was not. He had been slow by that evening. Quiet in a way that was not like him. She had found the first healer by the following morning. The diagnosis had been quick and confident. Reef toxin, a common hazard for young dragons during coastal migration, rarely fatal if treated promptly. The purge compound was standard. She had given it to Sorn herself, measured carefully, exactly as instructed. By the second day he was worse. The second healer had said the same thing as the first. More compound. Give it time. The toxin was working its way out. This was normal. By the third day Sorn had stopped making noise entirely. He had not made a sound in 36 hours. Not a cry, not a chirp, nothing. Vareth described this particular fact in a voice that was completely flat and even, and Aldrich understood that the flatness was not indifference. It was what was left of a person after they had been frightened for long enough that the fear had nowhere left to go. Aldrich's hands moved while she talked. He worked slowly and carefully, which was its own kind of language. Slow hands near a frightened animal, near a frightened parent, said something that words sometimes could not. He was not rushing. He was not panicking. He was simply working, the way a man works when he has done something so many times that it lives in his hands rather than his head. He checked the hatchling's primary breathing, the chest rise, the rhythm, the effort involved. Then he moved his hands to the sides, feeling for the rib structure, mapping it against what he knew of draconic anatomy from 38 years of working on the edges of known space where you treated what showed up and figured out the rest as you went. He found something on the left side. He pressed carefully, 2 fingers just below where the secondary rib cage began. Sorn flinched. Even unconscious, even this far down, the hatchling flinched. Aldrich stayed very still for a moment. Then he pressed again, gently, in a slightly different place. He was building a picture in his head, mapping the resistance, the tenderness, the way the tissue responded under his fingertips. It was a skill that could not be taught in a classroom. It was built from years of doing it in conditions where imaging equipment did not exist and your hands were the only tools you had. He sat back on his heels. He was quiet for long enough that Vareth made a small sound above him. Not a word, just a sound, the involuntary noise of someone who has been waiting for an answer for 4 days and cannot wait one more second. The healers were not wrong about the toxin, Aldrich said slowly. But they were only looking at the toxin. He turned to look up at her. Your species has 2 breathing passages. Primary and secondary. The purge compound they gave him, it works by reducing the toxin load in the body tissue. That's correct. That's what it's supposed to do. He paused. But one of the side effects of that compound at the doses they gave him is inflammation of the surrounding tissue. In an adult dragon, the secondary passage is large enough that some inflammation doesn't matter much. In a hatchling. He stopped. He watched her face while she understood. It took only a moment. She was not slow. She had spent 4 days learning everything she could about what was happening inside her son, and the pieces connected fast. The passage, she said. It closed. Not completely. But enough. He's been breathing on one passage for at least 2 days. Aldrich kept his voice steady and factual, because that was what she needed right now. Not softness. Facts. The toxin was never going to kill him. His body was handling it. But the treatment caused a problem the healers didn't look for because they were focused on what they already knew. Vareth was very still. They made him worse, she said. They made a mistake, Aldrich said. A common one. You treat what you see and you miss what you weren't looking for. He held her gaze. I can fix it. But I need some things from my clinic and I need you to keep answering my questions. Can you do that? She looked at him for a long moment. Yes, she said. Aldrich turned and found that old Franklin Marsh, the colony doctor, 61 years old and deeply committed to the idea of retirement, had appeared at the edge of the square at some point, still in his celebration coat, holding his hat in both hands with the expression of a man watching something happen that he does not entirely know what to do with. Franklin, Aldrich said. Back cabinet. Large irrigation kit. The suction rig. Box of anti-inflammatory agents, the full box. And the fluid flush set, the one in the green case. Franklin opened his mouth. I know, Aldrich said. You didn't train for this. I did. Please get the kit. Pause. Franklin put his hat back on, turned around and went to get the kit. More people had come back to the edges of the square by now. Aldrich was aware of them the way he was always aware of the edges of a space when he was working. Not focused on them but knowing they were there. Farmers and families and old veterans standing in the cold in their New Year coats, not talking. Just watching. Even the children had come back, standing close to their parents, quiet in the particular way children go quiet when they understand that something serious is happening even if they do not understand what. Nobody left. Franklin came back with the kit in 3 minutes. He set it down beside Aldrich and crouched nearby without being asked, which was more than Aldrich had expected and exactly what he needed. The problem now was chemistry. The flush compound he needed, something that would reduce the inflammation in the secondary passage without interacting badly with the purge compound already in Soren's system, in a body that was not remotely human, did not exist in his kit in the form he needed it. Not for a dragon. His kit was built for human patients with some broad-spectrum capability for the more common species. Draconic physiology sat well outside that range. But the chemistry was not so different at its core. Aldrich knew this the way he knew most things. Not from a textbook but from decades of field medicine in places where the right drug did not exist and you had to build something close enough from what you had. He had done it in burning buildings and crashed ships and field tents in the middle of combat zones. He had done it with less than he had right now. He talked Verith through it as he worked, asking questions, adjusting his calculations based on her answers. Soren's weight. His approximate age in developmental terms. What the purge compound had contained, she knew because she had read the label 4 times. How long ago the last dose had been given. Whether his temperature had risen or dropped. She answered everything immediately and precisely. No hesitation, no uncertainty. She had been preparing for this conversation for 4 days without knowing it, gathering every fact she could find because knowledge was the only thing left she could do for him when her own body could not fix what was wrong. Aldrich mixed the compound carefully, working by lantern light, Franklin holding the light steady without being asked. He checked his calculation 3 times. Then a 4th because this mattered. Then he looked up at Soren. The hatchling's breathing had grown more shallow in the last 20 minutes. The gaps were longer now. His small clawed hand had uncurled against the stone and lay open, still. Hold on, Aldrich said quietly. Just to Soren. Not to anyone else. Almost there. He picked up the irrigation line. His hands were perfectly steady. Around the square, in the cold New Year dark, not one person made a sound. Aldrich worked in silence. That was the thing people who had never done field medicine did not understand, the quiet of it. Not the dramatic, fast-moving chaos that appeared in films and stories, with shouting and running and last-second heroics. Real medicine, the kind done in broken places with broken tools, was mostly quiet, mostly still. Mostly one person, alone with their training in their hands, doing one small careful thing after another and not thinking about what happened if it did not work. Aldrich had learned to live in that quiet a long time ago. He inserted the irrigation line carefully, guided by what his fingers had mapped out earlier and by Veritha's precise answers to every question he had asked. The secondary passage entrance in a hatchling was small, much smaller than in an adult, and he had to work slowly to avoid causing additional irritation to tissue that was already inflamed and sore. He talked as he worked. Not to the crowd, not to Franklin, not even really to Verith. Just to Soren. You're doing well, he said quietly. Just stay with me. Almost done. Soren did not respond. His breathing had been growing shorter and further apart for the past 10 minutes, and every time a gap stretched a little longer than the last one, Aldrich felt the familiar cold focus settle over him, the thing that happened in the worst moments of his career when everything narrowed down to the next step and only the next step, because anything beyond that was too large to hold and still keep your hands steady. Next step. Just the next step. He began the flush. The compound went in slowly, gravity fed through the irrigation line, temperature matched as close as he could manage to what Vareth had described as Soren's normal body warmth. Too cold would cause the inflamed tissue to contract further. Too warm would increase the inflammation. Aldrich had spent 6 minutes getting the temperature right, which Franklin had clearly found frustrating but had the wisdom not to say out loud. Vareth had gone absolutely still above him. She was not breathing, he realized. Or barely breathing. She had pulled in one long slow breath when he began and was simply holding it, the way a person holds their breath when they are afraid that even that small movement might disturb something fragile and important. The square was the same. Aldrich had worked in front of crowds before. Accident scenes, public emergencies, the controlled chaos of field hospitals with too many eyes and not enough space. He knew the particular quality of a watching crowd, the murmur, the movement, the way attention shifted and wandered even among people who meant to stay focused. This crowd did none of that. 200 colonists stood in the cold New Year dark and made no sound at all. No shuffling. No whispering. Even the children were still, pressed against their parents, watching the old man on his knees in the snow with the kind of simple and total attention that children sometimes give to things they instinctively understand are important. Franklin Marsh held the lantern and did not move. Prentice Webb stood at the edge of the square with his rifle at his side, and his young face had lost all of its earlier fear and settled into something older and more serious. The flush ran for 4 minutes. Aldrich watched Soren's left side the entire time, his fingers resting lightly against the ribs, reading the tissue through his fingertips the way he had learned to read 100 things that could not be seen. He was feeling for the slight give that would tell him the inflammation was responding. The small change in resistance that would mean the passage was beginning to open. At 3 minutes he felt nothing. At 3 minutes and 40 seconds he felt something. It was very slight. The kind of change that only existed if you were looking for it, and only made sense if you knew what you were looking for. A small softening. A slight shift in the pressure under his fingers. Aldrich did not let himself react to it. Not yet. He had been here before, the moment that looked like improvement but was not, the false turn that gave hope and then took it back. He had learned not to spend hope before it was earned. He withdrew the irrigation line with the same careful slowness he had used going in. Then he sat back on his heels, placed both hands flat on his knees and waited. The secondary passage needed a moment. The tissue needed to move on its own, now that the inflammation had been addressed. He could not force it. He could not rush it. He had done what could be done and now the rest of it was up to Soren. 10 seconds. 20. The gaps in Soren's breathing were very long now. Too long. Each one stretched out like a held note, and during each one Aldrich was aware of the entire square holding itself in the same suspension. 200 people and one dragon, breathing together without meaning to, waiting for one small hatchling to breathe. 30 seconds. Vareth made a sound. Just one. Small and low, barely above silence. The translator did not attempt it. 40 seconds. Aldrich kept his hands flat on his knees and his eyes on Soren's left side, and he did not think about anything beyond this moment, this square, this small pale creature in the snow. He did not think about the 6 dog tags on his medic bag. He did not think about the field hospital where he had knelt in positions very much like this one and the breathing had not come back. He did not think about any of that. He just waited. And then Soren coughed. It came from somewhere deep, a full-body thing violent and sudden, that shook the hatchling from nose to tail and made Vareth lurch forward half a meter before she caught herself. It was not a gentle cough. It was the kind of cough that meant something had broken loose, something that had been stuck for 4 days, and the body was throwing everything it had at getting it out. Aldrich leaned forward and kept his hands steady on the hatchling's sides, supporting, not restricting, talking through it. That's it, keep going, let it come, don't fight it. The same words he had used 100 times for 100 different patients in 100 different broken places, words that he was not sure anyone could hear but said anyway because the voice mattered even when the words did not. The cough peaked. And then it stopped. And Soren breathed. It was not a small breath. It was not a shallow, uncertain, trying breath. It was deep and full and even, the breath of a body that had just remembered how breathing was supposed to work and was doing it properly for the first time in 4 days. The little chest rose completely, held, fell completely. Rose again. Steady. Clean. Even. The silence in the square lasted exactly 3 seconds after that breath. Then the colony clock on the eastern wall of the square began to strike midnight. 1, 2, 3. The first firework went up from somewhere behind the eastern rooftops. Someone had kept the timer running even through everything, and burst gold and white over Ashford's Rest, completely indifferent to what had just happened below it, beautiful and absurd in equal measure. 4, 5, 6. Vareth made a sound. The translator box on Aldrich's collar attempted it once, produced a single line of text, and then went quiet as if it understood that it had done the best it could. Untranslatable, grief transition, relief beyond expression. It was not a roar. It was not a cry in any way that the word usually meant. It was something that came from the deepest part of her and moved through the air like a physical thing, low and resonant and enormous, a sound that had 4 days of terror and exhaustion and desperate flight packed into it, releasing all at once into the cold New Year air over a small colony at the edge of nowhere. Several people in the crowd were crying. Not all of them knew why. Some of them would think about it later and still not be able to explain it exactly, only that the sound had reached into some part of them that was older than words, the part that understood loss and relief in any language, and it had simply opened something up. 7, 8, 9. More fireworks now. Green and red and silver, bursting over the rooftops, reflecting off the snow on the ground, filling the square with shifting colored light. Soren opened his eyes. They were pale gold, unfocused at first, blinking slowly in the lantern light, confused in the gentle way of something waking from a very deep and difficult sleep. He looked at the sky, at the fireworks, at his mother's face above him, her amber eyes bright with something that needed no translation at all. Then he looked at Aldrich, and he reached out. The small clawed hand, no bigger than Aldrich's palm, the claws barely the length of his fingernails, found Aldrich's scarred and weathered fingers and held on with a grip that was surprisingly firm for something that had been unconscious 4 minutes ago. 10, 11, 12. The clock finished. The new year began. Aldrich looked at the small hand holding his. He looked at it for quite a long time. Then he looked at the paving stones just to the left of Soren's head, and he breathed carefully through his nose, and he did not look up again for a while. Franklin Marsh, crouched 2 meters away with the lantern still in his hands, looked at the ground as well. Prentice Webb turned and faced the opposite direction entirely and appeared to be studying the architecture of the building behind him with great interest. When Vareth lowered her great head to the ground before Aldrich, slowly, deliberately, all the way down until her chin touched the cold stone, the crowd finally made a sound. Not a cheer. Something softer than that. Something that had no name but felt like it should. Aldrich Voss, Vareth said. My flame remembers you. Aldrich cleared his throat. He straightened up. He patted Soren's small head once, twice, with his free hand. The hand the hatchling was not currently holding, the awkward, gentle pat of a man who was not accustomed to showing tenderness but was feeling it very strongly right now whether he wanted to or not. You're going to be just fine, little one, he said. He meant every single word. The colony settled slowly back into itself after midnight. Not all the way. Not completely. The kind of night that had just happened did not simply end and become ordinary, it left something behind in the air, a particular stillness, the way a room feels after something important has been said in it. People drifted home in small groups, speaking quietly, glancing back over their shoulders at the square. The fireworks had finished. The lanterns that had survived the landing still swayed in the cold wind, casting long slow shadows across the cracked paving stones. Vareth did not move. She curled herself around Soren in the center of the square the way Aldrich had seen Biscuit curl around his own bed on cold nights, completely, deliberately, every part of her positioned to hold warmth in and cold out. Her great tail wrapped around the outer edge, her wings folded close and low, her head resting near Soren so that every breath the hatchling took was something she could feel as well as see. Soren slept. His breathing was even and deep and steady, and every time Aldrich checked it through the night he felt the same quiet satisfaction of a thing done correctly, not pride exactly, just the clean and simple feeling of a problem met and solved, which was the closest thing to peace that his particular kind of work had ever offered him. He checked on them twice before morning. Both times Vareth watched him approach across the empty square with amber eyes that caught the last of the lantern light, and both times she said nothing, only watched, and he nodded at her and checked Soren's breathing and his temperature and the left side of his chest, and then went back to his clinic and his notes. He did not sleep. He had not expected to. Instead he sat at his desk with the squeaking chair and the lamp turned low and he wrote. Everything he had done, everything he had used, every calculation he had made and why, all of it, organized and clear, in the plain direct language he had learned to use in field reports where there was no time for anything complicated. He wrote it once for his own records and then he wrote it again, cleaner and more careful as a guide. Something that another medic could follow. Something that could be used again if this situation ever arose somewhere else, for some other hatchling, by someone who had not had 38 years to build the knowledge Aldrich had used tonight. He finished as the first gray light was coming through the clinic window. He folded the second copy carefully, put it in his coat pocket, picked up his medic bag and went to put the coffee on. Biscuit was waiting by the door, tail moving slowly. "Come on then," Aldrich said. The square looked different in the morning light. Quieter, obviously. Empty of people, the cracked paving stones dusted with fresh snow that had fallen in the small hours. But different in another way too, the way places look different after something has happened in them. The fire drum was still on its side where it had fallen. The outline of Veritha's landing was pressed into the snow around the edges of the square, a vast impression of wings and body that in the pale morning light looked almost like something carved deliberately. Several small offerings had appeared near where Verith slept. Aldrich noticed them as he crossed the square, a folded blanket, thick wool, the kind people kept for guests. A large clay bowl filled with water, still steaming slightly, meaning someone had brought it out recently and kept it warm. A bundle of dried provisions tied with string, clearly meant for Sorn. A child's drawing, weighted down with a stone, a rough but recognizable picture of a large green shape and a small bronze shape side by side, with what appeared to be fireworks overhead. Nobody had left their name on any of it. Aldrich looked at the offerings for a moment, then kept walking. Verith heard him coming before he reached her. Her head lifted slowly, amber eyes finding him across the square with the alert, careful attention of a creature whose instincts were still running even through exhaustion. Then she recognized him and the tension went out of her neck and shoulders in a way that was so similar to what a human did that it stopped him for just a second. "Morning," he said. He rounded the curve of her tail and stopped. Sorn was awake. Not just awake, trying to stand, which was a project he had been working on for what looked like some time, based on the small shuffled impressions in the snow around him. His legs were still not entirely reliable. They kept sliding outward at unexpected moments, which he was addressing by trying again immediately with an attitude of complete confidence that this time would definitely be different. His scales had changed overnight. The pale ash gray was entirely gone, replaced by a deep warm bronze that caught the morning light and held it. His eyes, when they found Aldrich, were bright and sharp and gold. He made a sound, short, bright, the vocal equivalent of a question mark, and tried to take a step toward Aldrich and sat down instead. Aldrich crouched down to his level. "Good morning to you too," he said. He ran through the checks, breathing first, both passages clean and even. Temperature, normal for the species based on Veritha's descriptions. The left side, which he pressed carefully, Sorn looked at him with mild curiosity rather than flinching, which was exactly right. Appetite, Verith confirmed, had returned in the night. He had eaten twice already. Aldrich straightened up and drank his coffee. "He's well," he said. "Not a question." "He is well," Verith said. Something in the way she said it, simple, direct, like a person setting down something very heavy that they had been carrying for a long time, made Aldrich look at his coffee cup for a moment. He reached into his coat and took out the folded papers. "Aftercare," he said, holding them out. "No reef feeding for 6 weeks. His secondary passage needs time to fully settle. The inflammation will be completely gone within 3 days, but the tissue will be sensitive for longer than that. No fire use for 4 days." He paused. "If he becomes lethargic again before the 3 days are up, or if his breathing changes, find a medic and show them these notes. Everything I did is written down in order. Any trained medic can follow it." Verith took the papers between 2 careful claws. She looked at them with the focused attention she had given everything he said from the beginning. Total, complete, storing every word. A silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable. The easy silence of 2 people who have been through something together and do not need to fill the space with noise. Then Verith said, "Why did you help us?" Aldrich looked at her. It was not an ungrateful question. It was a genuine one. The question of someone who had been turned away enough times that the alternative had stopped feeling like something she could expect, and now that she had received it she wanted to understand it. Not to question it. Just to understand. Aldrich thought about it for a moment in case there was a complicated answer hiding somewhere that he had not considered. There was not. "You had a sick child?" he said. "I'm a medic." He shrugged one shoulder. "That's the whole story." Verith looked at him for a long time. Her amber eyes moved to his medic bag. To the dog tags hanging from the handle, 6 of them worn smooth, swaying slightly in the morning wind. She had noticed them the night before. He had seen her notice them. "The war," she said quietly. 22 years ago," he said. "Border campaign." "I know the campaign," she said. Something in her voice made him look up. "I lost my mate," Verith said. "A border skirmish in the 3rd year of the campaign. A small engagement. The kind that does not appear in any history. She looked at Sorn, who had finally managed to stay standing for 3 consecutive seconds and was extremely pleased about this. Sorn has never met his father. Aldrich said nothing for a moment. The morning wind moved across the square and lifted a small curl of snow from the ground between them. No, he said. He hasn't. They sat with that for a while. 2 people from opposite sides of a forgotten war, sitting in the snow of a quiet colony at the edge of space, watching a small bronze hatchling practice standing up. No more words were needed and neither of them tried to find any. Then Vareth moved. She reached into the carrying pouch at her side, a deep leather fold at her flank that Aldrich had not paid much attention to, and removed something slowly with both forelimbs, handling it with a care that told him immediately it was significant before he even saw what it was. A single scale. It was the size of a large dinner plate, deep gold, catching the morning light with a warmth that seemed to come from inside it rather than reflected off the surface. It was not a shed scale, he could see that clearly. The base of it was raw and new, the surrounding area faintly marked from recent removal. She had taken it from her own body. Recently. She set it at his feet with great care, both forelimbs lowering it to the stone as if placing something on an altar. From my own body, she said. If any being in any territory ever moves against you personally or against this place, show them this. Her amber eyes held his steadily. Every dragon who flies these sectors will recognize it. They will know whose flame stands behind Aldrich Voss and behind Ashford's Rest. Aldrich looked at the scale for a long time. It sat on the cold stone and glowed. He thought about saying that it was not necessary. He thought about saying that he had only done what any medic would do, which was what he believed and what was also, he was beginning to understand, perhaps not entirely the point. He picked up the scale. It was warm. Even in the winter morning air, it held its own warmth, solid and steady in his hands. He looked at it once more. Then he turned to his medic bag, unstrapped the side pocket, and fastened the gold scale carefully alongside the 6 dog tags. He did not say anything. He did not need to. Vareth watched him do it, and something in her expression settled into a quiet satisfaction that had no name in any language but was perfectly clear anyway. Sorn chose this moment to finally walk 3 full steps in a row, sit down with great dignity as if he had meant to do that, and then sneeze, a small burst of flame and smoke that singed the corner of Aldrich's boot. Both of them looked at the boot. Both of them looked at Sorn. Sorn looked back with complete innocence. 4 days, Aldrich reminded him. No fire for 4 days. Sorn blinked his gold eyes slowly. Aldrich picked up his coffee, found it had gone cold, and drank it anyway. The colony came back to the square without being asked. That was the thing that struck Aldrich most later when he thought about it. Nobody had sent a message. Nobody had knocked on doors or called out names or organized anything. People had simply appeared. The way people appear when something is happening that they understand without being told, is the kind of thing you show up for. By the time the morning had settled into its full gray winter light, most of Ashford's Rest was standing at the edges of the square. They came in the way people come to things they are not entirely sure about, quietly in ones and twos, standing a respectful distance back, hands in pockets or wrapped around warm cups. Farmers who had been up since before dawn. Families with children pressed close to their parents' sides. Old veterans who had lived through enough to know when a moment was worth standing in the cold for. Young Prentice Webb was there, rifle nowhere in sight, hands at his sides, standing straight. Franklin Marsh stood near the clinic steps with his hat on and his coat buttoned wrong and the expression of a man who had not slept and had decided that was perfectly fine. Nobody talked much. They just stood and watched Vareth prepare to leave and watched Sorn and watched Aldrich. The way a community watches someone who belongs to them do something that makes them proud, even if they would not have put it in those words. Sorn was the immediate problem. He did not want to go. This had become clear within about 4 minutes of Vareth beginning her departure preparations. She had risen from her sleeping position, shaken the overnight snow from her wings, checked her carrying pouch, and looked at her son with the expression of a mother communicating that it was time to leave now. Sorn had looked back at her with the expression of someone who had heard that information and filed it away for later consideration. Then he had walked directly to Aldrich and sat on his feet. Vareth made a sound. Sorn did not move. Aldrich looked down at the bronze hatchling sitting on his boots with complete contentment, and then looked up at Vareth with an expression that was carefully neutral. Vareth crossed to her son, lifted him gently with both forelimbs, carried him back to her side and set him down. Sorn stood there for exactly 4 seconds. Then he walked back to Aldrich and sat on his feet again. A sound moved through the watching crowd, not quite a laugh, something warmer and quieter than that, the sound a group of people makes when something unexpected turns out to be exactly right. Aldrich crouched down. Soren looked at him with bright gold eyes and made the short questioning sound he had made that morning, the one that meant something between hello and what are you doing and also can I come with you. You cannot come with me, Aldrich told him seriously. You have a mother. She has been flying for 4 days and worrying for longer than that and she would like to go home now. Soren breathed a small warm puff onto Aldrich's hands. That is not an argument, Aldrich said. Behind him he heard Franklin Marsh make a sound that was definitely not a laugh because Franklin Marsh was a serious medical professional. Vareth retrieved Soren a second time. She carried him further back on this occasion and kept one forelimb lightly around him, and the look she gave him was the universal look of a parent who has moved past gentle suggestion and into firm expectation. Soren accepted this with dignity. He sat beside his mother and looked at Aldrich across the square with an expression of patient waiting, as if he was simply giving the situation time to resolve itself in a more favorable direction. The children at the edge of the square loved all of this completely. Several of them had crept steadily closer over the past hour, drawn forward by the same gravity that draws children toward large animals when the adults around them have decided the large animal is safe. They stood now in a loose half-circle at the nearest edge of what felt like a reasonable distance, wide-eyed and delighted. One small girl, no more than 6, in a red coat with the hood up, was watching Soren with the focused intensity of someone making a decision. Then she walked forward, held out a piece of dried fruit from her pocket and waited. Soren looked at the fruit. Looked at his mother. Vareth made a slight gesture that apparently meant yes, go ahead. Soren took the fruit very carefully from the girl's small hand, ate it, and then made a sound that the translator did not attempt but which made the girl break into a smile so large it seemed like it should not fit on such a small face. Aldrich watched this and looked at his coffee cup and said nothing. Then Vareth straightened. The change was immediate, a shift in her posture, in the quality of her stillness, that moved through the watching crowd like a signal. People stood a little straighter without meaning to. The quiet deepened. Even the children felt it and stepped back instinctively to stand with their parents. Vareth turned to face the assembled colony. All of them. The full half-circle of Ashford's Rest, standing in the New Year morning in their coats and scarves, breath clouding in the cold air. She spoke in her own language, long and formal and deliberate, each phrase placed with the careful weight of something official. The translator on Aldrich's collar worked steadily, rendering it into flat simple text, but even without the translation the tone was unmistakable. This was not conversation. This was declaration. The translation came through piece by piece. That this settlement was hereby registered under the protection of her lineage. That any vessel, faction, government, or individual that moved against Ashford's Rest in any way moved against her and all those sworn to her flame. That any territorial claim, border dispute, or tax demand directed at this colony would be answered directly and personally. That this protection was not temporary and not conditional. And then the last part. These are Vaskin, she said. Let all who fly these sectors know it. The square was completely silent. Aldrich stood in the middle of it and looked at the ground for a moment. He was aware in the silence of what had just happened. Not just the words, the practical reality underneath them. Ashford's Rest sat on the edge of 3 competing territorial boundaries. For 3 years the Colony Council had been quietly worried about border pressures, about the increasing frequency of unregistered ships coming through the outer markers, about the fact that a settlement this small and this far out had very little standing to push back against anyone who decided it was convenient to push. It had been a background anxiety, the kind that nobody talked about directly but that everyone felt, the slow worry of people who had built something good in a vulnerable place. That problem was now gone. Solved completely and permanently on New Year's morning, because an old medic had picked up his bag and walked across a square toward something that every reasonable instinct said to walk away from. Prentice Webb, standing near the back of the crowd, stared at nothing in particular with the expression of a young man rapidly recalculating several things at once. Franklin Marsh turned to Aldrich very slowly. Did she just? Yes, Aldrich said. The border security issue that the council has been? Yes. With a handwritten note and a suction rig. And the irrigation kit, Aldrich said. Don't forget the irrigation kit. Franklin looked at him for a long moment. I'm putting that in the clinic records, he said finally. That is going in the official records, Aldrich. Do what you want, Aldrich said. Vareth spread her wings. The downwash hit the square like a warm wall, not the cold displaced air of her arrival the night before, but something warmer, steadier, the powerful and controlled beat of a creature that had rested and was ready. Snow lifted from every surface and spun outward in long white curtains. The lanterns that had survived the night swung wildly. Children grabbed their parents and laughed. She lifted. 10 meters. 20. The shadow of her wings swept across the square and the crowd and the clinic roof and kept going, rising fast and clean into the pale winter sky. Soren, pressed against her chest, craned his small neck back. He was looking at the square below him, at the people, at the child in the red coat who was waving both arms, at the gray-haired man standing in the center of the cracked paving stones with a coffee cup in his hand. He looked at Aldrich. Aldrich raised his coffee cup slightly. Soren opened his small mouth and breathed out one single enthusiastic burst of flame, bright gold and genuinely impressive for 8 months old, and it went exactly where his aim sent it, which was directly at Aldrich's face, because Soren's aim was not yet something he had full control over. It took the left eyebrow completely off. The crowd erupted. Not fear. Laughter, real laughter, the helpless kind, spreading through 200 people at once like something released. Even Prentice Webb, who had been maintaining a very professional expression all morning, put his hand over his face. Franklin Marsh sat down on the clinic steps and laughed until his hat fell off. Aldrich stood in the square and looked at nothing in particular while the laughter went on around him. He raised one hand and touched the place where his left eyebrow had been. Smooth. Gone. Clean as anything. He looked up at the sky, where Vareth and Soren were already a dark shape against the pale clouds, rising fast, growing smaller with every second. One more beat of those great wings and they passed through the cloud layer and were gone entirely, leaving nothing behind but open winter sky and the last of the laughter dying down into something warm and quiet. The square settled. People began to drift away slowly, still smiling, talking quietly among themselves. The child in the red coat was telling her mother something with great animation, both hands moving. Prentice Webb retrieved his professional expression from wherever it had gone and put it back on, nodding respectfully at Aldrich as he passed. Franklin picked up his hat, dusted it off and went to open the clinic. Biscuit appeared from somewhere and sat beside Aldrich's leg. The square was empty now. Just Aldrich and his dog and the cracked paving stones and the impression left in the snow where something enormous had spent the night. The lanterns had gone still. The morning was cold and pale and quiet. Aldrich stood in it for a moment. He looked at his medic bag. The dog tags worn smooth. The gold scale strapped alongside them, warm even now, glowing faintly in the winter light. He thought about a lot of things briefly. About 38 years. About the 6 names on the dog tags. About a dragon who had flown 4 days with a dying child and found an old man who could not stop being a medic no matter how far he went or how much he wanted quiet. He nodded once to himself. Then he went inside. He put the kettle on. Outside, the new year lay over Ashford's Rest like fresh snow, clean and white and entirely unwritten. Quiet the way he had always wanted it. Just not in the way he had expected.